everybody, and welcome again to another episode of the Risk Matrix with James Junkin. Hi, James.
It's so great to be here, man. It is summertime in the South. We got so many cool things going on with safety, and it's awesome.
It's 20 degrees cooler here, so I got a nice ocean breeze off the eastern seaboard, so things aren't bad in New England either. So with James Junkin and me, Dr. Martin, we're here to talk about some risk and safety topics. Today's topic is a survey that we found that I think has got some interesting takeaways. But first, we're gonna have James give a word from our sponsor.
Well, this episode of Risk Matrix, powered by Veriforce, is sponsored by Veriforce Worker Pass. Now, Veriforce Worker Pass is a comprehensive worker-level compliance management solution. Using advanced technology with seamless integration, Veriforce Worker Pass gives companies the power to establish worker identity and qualifications, as well as monitoring compliance status with a level of precision and efficiency never before experienced in the industry. We all know about the importance of compliance at the worker level. That cannot be overstated. At the heart of Veriforce Worker Pass is a refined approach to compliance management that accommodates the needs of a very diverse supply chain. So to learn more about Veriforce Worker Pass and how Veriforce Worker Pass can help you achieve supply chain and contractor compliance, reduce risk, and ensure workers go home safe from high hazard jobs, visit veriforce.com/solutions/worksite-management. Dr. Martin.
Thanks, James. So I want to talk about today, or we want to talk about today, this survey that pulled up in my news feed today. Survey reveals small business safety concerns and unusual claims, but more importantly, two specific things. So apparently, this insurance company looked at roughly 1,000 small businesses and asked them what their biggest concerns were when it came to safety and insurance, and they were heat stress
and
mental illness, mental stress.
And what I find very remarkable about this article is when we look at a supply chain, a lot of the contractors in a supply chain are small businesses. So
Absolutely.
when we get a survey from that supply chain and they're putting out that their number one concerns related to safety are heat stress and mental health, that's something I think we should talk about.
I agree. And both of these topics have been consistently been on the top of mind of many of the researchers, many of the governmental agencies. Certainly in Europe, they've already got standards, and in other parts of the world. So, and I know you're a little bit more up on this. So let's start with heat stress, because you look at a lot of these policies with your role at Veriforce and also with your role at Mariner Golf. So let's talk about that. Well, like what are we doing here in the US, and what do we need to be looking at in order to start to allay some of these concerns?
Well, one of the first things we need to talk about from a regulatory standpoint is there a regulation that we need to be complying with? And on the federal level, while OSHA has recognized heat as a known hazard, there is no federal standard for heat stress. They're working on a standard. There's a lot of talk about a federal heat standard. You know, the head of OSHA has her roots in California that does have a heat stress standard. So what I find is many times a company's heat stress standard is really, how do I put this, insufficient in its ability to protect workers. So I want to talk a little bit about what should go into a heat stress standard as we're getting into these summer months. It was 97 today at my house with a heat index over 100. And we went from spring to boiling hot like that. So having a period to acclimatize to that, that's part of it. And sometimes that's what's missing from workers' policies and procedures that affect workers on the job site. So let's start with something that's pretty common, right? That you should have, that's not in most people's policy. Access to potable drinking water. Okay? Access to potable drinking water. That needs to be supplied by the company, not just, hey, y'all grab some Gatorades or some Monster energy drinks down at the convenience store before you come to work.
Definitely not Monster energy drinks, right? Because caffeine helps to dehydrate us. So I really don't think Monster energy drinks are a good idea. I know that a lot of companies will, they'll supply something, which usually comes in the form of some name brand things that they get from the bigger safety suppliers. But potable drinking water is probably the best thing that you can be supplying to those workers, right?
And
great if it's cold too.
There's a component of that that often gets overlooked. Okay. The water needs to be fresh. It needs to be pure. It needs to be suitably cool. Suitably cool. So, invest for your workers that are out there an ice chest or whatever you're putting your potable water in that retains the coolness inside there, because it gets super hot and it's sitting out in the sun in a lot of places, right? And it needs to be provided free of charge. Free of charge. It shudders me that I have to remind companies you can't charge people for this water, right?
I haven't worked for anybody that's charged people for water, but I have worked for several companies that don't supply water, right? But then again, I've worked for companies that have ice chests in the trailers. So I mean, it just really depends. And so I think we need to get more of a coordinated effort with small businesses. Certainly they can't be that much of a cost to supply cool drinking water, even if it's just bottled water out of the sun, etc.
Right.
So, that's a big thing. And you mentioned earlier, and didn't want to break in on you, but acclimatization, right? I don't think people understand. People get out of their nice air conditioned trucks, probably down in the south where you are, and jump right into the heat, right? And while that may be fine for the first few minutes, half hour, etc., that's really not acclimatization as it's meant to be applied, right? There needs to be time for workers to take breaks, rest periods, spend bigger blocks of time in the sun and in the heat, along with the potable drinking water and some other measures, right? That's acclimatization. That's kind of fading into the hard work, right?
Absolutely.
And on some days, I got to be honest with you, there are some tasks that shouldn't be accomplished.
One of these things, and what I'm giving you is kind of modeled off for the Cal OSHA standard. So there's some flexibility on how you go about implementing these things when you're not in Cal OSHA. So you may not be cited by OSHA for not following federal OSHA, for not following all the elements we're going to talk about today, but it's a recognized hazard. And so they will cite you under the general duty clause, and frequently do so. The failure to offer a period of time for workers to acclimate to the heat, if that's a contributing factor in the injury, then that could be possibly one of the predicates necessary for OSHA to have a citation against you for failing to adequately protect your workers from a known and recognized hazard. So we get workers from all over the United States, all over the world in some cases, coming and working in construction, in telecommunications, in oil and gas,
where you're
outside in the heat. And like I said, it wasn't just a few days ago. It was in the South. It was, nice, gentle breeze coming off the Gulf, pretty warm, mid 80s, whatever. Now it's 97 and the grass is starting to die. So your workers need to have some period of acclimatization, right?
Yep.
To the work that they're going to be in. Is that in your program?
I think it's part of I think it's part of your program, right? I mean,
right.
When we talk about program, we talk about elements, right? And providing water is an element. Acclimatization is an element, right? And there are published industrial hygiene tables and guidelines that can lead you through what that kind of looks like. Now, that being said, every site, every project, every day
Don't do it.
Is always different, and it just depends. Okay, so it just depends. So in your policies and procedures, what I want to say is, while you can put in an acclimatization schedule, you have to go back and revisit that based on conditions, or you need to put additional provisions in there that help you determine when those tables or those rest periods or those acclimatization periods don't apply, and you need to be more stringent.
Right. And I kind of make fun of you, it just depends, but also just depends not what the thermometer says, but humidity is a factor.
Humidity is a horrible factor that comes in.
When I go out to Vegas and it's 105 degrees, okay, it just feels warm to me. But 105 degrees in Texas around Galveston with 85% humidity, that's
feels like you're breathing water. So like you're breathing hot water.
Absolutely. And one of the next elements of a functioning heat stress illness prevention program, according to Cal OSHA, is you have to provide access to shade whenever the temperature exceeds 80 degrees. The shaded area must be open and provided with ventilation or cooling. Now, that's an element that I don't see. I see a lot of people working out in construction, in the oil and gas industry, and a lot of heat, right? But they don't have a tent set up with a cool area or a place for workers to go rest. Now, the worst case I saw this.
Go ahead.
Was in the oil spill, BP oil spill, right? We had to learn the hard way in this response. And you and I have talked multiple times about this response. But we sent more people to the hospital from heat-related illnesses than we did ever from being exposed to any type of oil or dispersant, right? I mean, literally lined up down the beaches, queued up ambulance after ambulance after ambulance after ambulance.
That's crazy.
So we got people from all over the country. Remember this thing kicked off at the end of April, and it went through the entire summer of 2010 and over into the early part of the winter. So you had people coming in from all over the nation to come down in the South when it was just turning hot. And so one of the corrective actions we put in place to protect our workers was tented areas with shade and cool zones, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
so let's talk about cool zones, right? What constitutes a cool zone? Is it just fans, ventilation? I mean, because out here where we live and it's not so hot, right? I take my kids to the water park or to an amusement park or any type of facility where you have kids, and they do have these cooling tents, and they also have spray mists, right?
Yep.
That spray cool water to kind of just help the body kind of regulate the heat. So, I mean, I don't know if that's what you're kind of talking about, or if
that's what
I'm just fans.
Talking about. We would take wraps to go around their neck that were very cool. They weren't like ice, but they were cool. They put them around their necks. They could wipe down with it. They would have fans and mist, because you don't want to go from it being in 100-degree heat to being 55 degrees. That's how your body goes into shock. So something reasonable, and also we set limits on giving people supplements like Gatorade, or similar type products. We used to say, as a rule, for every one Gatorade, you need to drink 5 waters. Now, this is funny. So I had this kid come up to me afterward, and he said, "Mr. James, you got me in trouble." I said, "What do you mean I got you in trouble?" "Well, you told me to drink a Gatorade to every 5 waters." So I drank my Gatorade, and I slammed 5 waters, and I threw up all over the place. I said, "I don't know if you're smart enough to go out there and work in the oil spill." Roll Tide. But,
Roll Tide, roll
make sure
Tide.
you're clear on your instructions, because this hand really thought we meant that he drank, when there was big
And all at once, and all
Gatorade,
at once, right?
and then chugged 5 bottles of water. So, that was a learning.
That was your error.
experience.
That actually
That's
was
right.
your error, because you didn't provide good enough instructions, right?
That's right.
So
Go ahead.
keep going.
A plan of action at a certain degree temperature. So California requires that when the temperature equals or exceeds 95 degrees Fahrenheit, that you will implement the following measures at a minimum to the extent where practical. All right, who gets to decide whether it was practical or not?
Just depends.
If the compliance officer's there, they get to decide what's practical. If we end up in the court, the jury gets to decide what's practical, right? So ensuring that effective communication by voice, observation, or electronic means is maintained so that employees at the work site can contact a supervisor when necessary. Who would have thought about a communication plan?
Supervisor needs to listen too, though. So
right.
let's not
We're
forget.
going to get to training on the supervisor, because Cal OSHA is very specific. And this is where I find that people have gaps in their programs, whether they're subject to the state of California's Cal OSHA regulations or not, right? But it makes good sense. Have a good communications plan. If I've got a crew out there working, particularly in the oil and gas industry, this crew may be many, many miles with a foreman and 2 workers on a site that's got a pump jack. Right? So you've got to have a means of communication, whether that's by voice, observation, or electronic means, so that employees at the work site can contact a supervisor when necessary. Number 2, you have to have a process for observing employees for alertness and signs or symptoms of heat illness.
Give me some examples of that, James. I'm thinking, as an industrial hygienist, that I would go to the industrial hygiene on heat stress and be looking at things like the vital signs that we can monitor, right? Even if we're not medical personnel, you can monitor temperature, do a core temperature, you can monitor things like that, blood pressure, etc. So what else are we talking about?
So signs and symptoms of people who are beginning to have heat stress. So we have heat stress, we have heat stroke, and heat stroke's always a medical emergency, right? So what signs of heat stress? Excessive sweating. Okay. People begin to slurring their speech a little bit. It's being extremely drowsy. Heat rashes that pop up on people. It's pretty common in the South, especially among children, to get heat rashes, little pricklies, things of that nature. So part of an effective heat stress and illness prevention program is training your workers and your supervisors to recognize these signs and symptoms, so you can get involved early. I had a good friend many years ago working at a refinery in Alabama on an outage. That's what they call them in the north. South, they're a turnaround, right? They're on the turnaround at the refinery. And what are they wearing? Well, they're in a refinery, so they've got FR coveralls on. It is in August. It is super hot. This guy's doing a manual task. And next thing you know, he just passes out and wakes up at the hospital and his core temperature is like 104.
Wow.
That's in a life-threatening situation. So we should never even have gotten there. We should never have gotten to that.
You know, I have to tell you, I mean, I've been fortunate to be on some pretty bad jobs and also on some pretty good jobs over my career in the construction industry and in the manufacturing and refit. And I have actually had companies that bring on site an EMT.
Yep.
That it was in the bid to do that, to have an EMT. So, I mean, it's always an option, depends on what your budget is, but it can be done and has been done in the past.
You know, one other element is, yes, train your workers, but you need to make sure you're training your supervisors a little bit more before they're assigned the task of supervising people, right? They need
Amen.
to know what the signs and symptoms are. What are we going to do in the event of emergency? Part of our emergency action plan, it should be all part of that, right? So
And you have to trust that you have to have people in that have had that training that you can trust that will implement it.
So, you know, I'm a fan of hazards are best controlled in the design phase of the work, right? I have stole that from Fred Manuel. That is my motto.
No, I think the other one about the might be the garnish.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. The final garnish to a
Yeah.
reason.
Lethal
Yeah,
brew.
that's another one too. A final garnish to a lethal brew that's been long in the cooking.
Right.
But a good heat illness prevention program considers physical work factors that contribute to heat-related illnesses when designing the work. So that's one of the things that happened to my friend was they didn't consider the heat-related illness factors when they designed the work. This guy at that time was a little overweight. He's probably about 260. He's 5'10". This was his first job working out there in that plant. He's in FRs. He's doing manual labor. It was almost like the situation, it was inevitable that it was going to happen because he had the risk factors for it. He had not gone through any period to acclimatize for this situation. They put him in.
Probably was physically predisposed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when we say thinking about, you know, the physical work factors, you also have to think about the physical work factors of the people that you're assigning this work to. James cannot physically do what James used to do when I was 23, right? I just can't do it. I just can't do it. I would have to build up to that. I'm gonna need more rest periods. I'm gonna need more time to recovery for that, right? So that's thinking about the physical characteristics of effective workers when assigning tasks in heat stress environments. Hazards are best controlled in the planning of the work, right? In the planning of the work. So, you know, whether it's an administrative control, which is what we ended up doing in the oil spill, we hired hundreds of thousands of workers because we wanted to keep the operation running basically 24 hours a day, but we needed time for some of these workers to rest. So we had a big rotation. That's an administrative control. That's something to think about when you're designing and planning your work for people that are working in high heat environments, right? And then I'm going to throw this out to you. You're the scientist. I'm just a safety dude, right? A program that includes methods the company will use to provide salt replacement. Salt replacement.
There's your industrial hygienist right there.
Right. So we need some medical advice on that. So we just don't go out there and start giving people a bunch of salt because salt can also, we need to replace salt, but what can too much salt do?
Lots of things.
Drive your blood pressure up, can it?
Yeah.
Bad thing.
Especially if you're dehydrated.
Especially if you're dehydrated. So there's a lot that goes into a heat stress and illness prevention program. And I don't want to get into this welt bulb stuff that's floating around out there. It's been discredited in courtrooms, trying to figure out the humidity factor where we work 10 minutes and take, 50 minutes off. That's not reality.
A lot of common sense can do way more good than measurement with all those instruments and those types of things, right? So I agree with you. I think you got to get your program in order. You got to pre-plan for this. You've got to make these adjustments. And really, it's not a bad idea to start making them now, because there will be a heat stress standard. And if California leads the way, which they have, and we've got somebody in the administration that is born and bred in the California system, we might see a pretty robust heat stress standard.
I think it's coming. And I want to switch to the next one, because I found this very, very insightful and surprising. Mm-hmm. As a safety professional, if I came out there and said, hey, tell me, the two things as CEOs that keep you up at night related to safety, and polled them, I wouldn't have thought heat stress would have been one of the top. And I certainly wouldn't have thought this one would have been one of the top, but it makes sense, right?
Now remember, these are small business owners, right? So if that makes any difference in what their concerns are, I guess I would like to see, a similar study done with large corporations.
I wonder if there's a statistical difference.
I wonder if there is. I don't know, but as a small business owner, I think, heat stress, that's kind of a close to home thing, right? That's something that people really can wrap their mind around. Like, everybody's been hot before. I don't know if a lot of CEOs of multi-million-dollar companies go around thinking about, their 6,000 workers that are out in the heat every day, right? But if you're a small business, or you're a family-owned business, yeah, I could see where that would be top of mind, right?
Right.
But number two, let's move on to number two, because we've got to show.
Super surprising in a small business. I mean, they cited worst case scenarios. We've talked about these catastrophic events like natural disasters, workplace violence, those type of things. But 13%, which was significant in the ranking of all these different hazards that they reported, 13% of business owners said mental stress was the most common injury experienced by their company over the past half decade. Injury.
Yeah.
That workers that worked for them were injured by mental stress. Right. And I think a lot of times as safety professionals, we're so focused on the physical health, the physical protection of workers, when we forget probably the largest stress that we have in our lives comes from work.
It comes from work, but it comes from home. It comes from all over, quite frankly. And I know that a lot of safety professionals do talk, and risk professionals do talk a lot about what to do about this, because this becomes another thing that you throw on the safety professional, right? ESG, sustainability, environmental, mental health, the employee care program, workers' comp. I mean, everything's on the safety professional in a lot of these smaller companies. But here's the thing, and you said at the Veriforce client event that the speaker said something that really struck you, right?
Oh, yes. Yes. Georgia Bryce Hutchinson is a phenomenal speaker. And she is a mental health professional. Because usually when I go to these type of conferences and other conferences, we get a lot of value out of speakers. But normally it's a safety professional telling me about mental health issues, right? This is a mental health professional.
Right. Mental health first aid and all, whatever's the rave.
So I thought this was really great, because she said something that resonated with me, and that is, we are not trying to turn you into therapist, psychologist, or psychiatrist. That's our job. We're the professionals. We don't want you out there giving mental health advice and counseling. But what you need to know is how to recognize the warning signs of stress and mental health issues, which here were some that she mentioned: being more emotional than usual. Now, there's daily stress, right? And then there's chronic stressors. Everybody has a bad day. James has bad days, right? When I can go Old Navy fast. But if I'm doing that day after day after day after day, and that's some change for my personality, that might be an indicator that I'm having some type of mental stress, mental fatigue.
Right.
Or mental
In these
health.
field situations, James, a lot of people spend 6 or 8 or even more hours with each other every day, right? And at lunch, and I mean, like, basically you can't get away from them. So, my feeling is that it doesn't take an empath, right, to know when somebody's off. Okay. And it doesn't take an empath to know when somebody doesn't fit with the group, or if they're isolating themselves, or I mean, there are tons of warning signs, right? And it doesn't hurt anybody to keep an eye on things. It doesn't hurt anybody to run it up the flagpole, right? So that somebody can talk to, the supervisor can talk to them.
And that was her point, recognizing symptoms to alert others so they can get this person help. But, we don't want to go overboard with this. Everybody has a bad day. But when you start seeing people have changes in their personality and emotions, like feeling overwhelmed, who hasn't felt overwhelmed at least?
So what does overwhelmed look like, right? Some people it's anger. Some people the emotion is
it is to me. When I
tears.
get a lot of stuff on me, I
Me
can
too.
lash
My
out and be
Irish,
short.
my Irish comes up, right? And so, when you're talking about emotion, you're talking about, a range of emotions, right? It just depends on the person. And again, you work with somebody 8 to 10 hours a day. You should get a pretty good handle on what their baseline emotions are. Now, if you come upon somebody that's already having these stressors, it might be a little bit harder, because that might be their baseline for you. But collectively, as a work team, it's really important to kind of check in with each other and make sure that, maybe somebody who's worked there longer, or knows more about that person, can be able to give you some insight.
Here's some other warning signs of stress and mental health issues: trouble making decisions, solving problems, concentrating, and getting your work done. If someone has been Johnny or Jane on the spot for many years, and all of a sudden things seem off, they're missing deadlines, they're missing production schedules, they seem to be in meetings, but they're there, but they're not there, that might be an indicator of stress or a mental health issue. Certainly, people that are turning to alcohol and drugs to self-medicate, that's certainly a sign, a big red flag that someone's undergoing stress or mental health. Here's some that I found surprising, but not so, right? Not so much. I didn't think about it. People that sleep too much or eat, or obsessively eating or sleeping too much or too little.
Right. Right. So I think sometimes I'm in that category right there, right? I don't know if I sleep too much, but I definitely have restless nights, as a small business owner, and a consultant, right? But if it's consistently that the person is coming to work and they're not ready to work, and here we go into fit to work, right? And that's something that we should consistently be doing in the morning with each other, right? That check-in of, like, who's fit to work, and it's no shame if you're not.
And again, everybody has a bad day. These are symptoms it's not just a bad day. These are things that are developing over time, and you're not noticing a change from this person's normal behavior.
Right.
Something seems off. Low energy or no energy. Depression can make you feel like you don't want to get out of bed. And if they go from being chatty and all that to, Well, dude's kind of pulling away from us today, the next day, the next day, the next day, there might be a problem. Might be. It's
So
not up
let's,
to us to diagnose. See, that's the thing I got
well,
from Georgia. We don't need to be out there creating psychological diagnoses of people. We're just recognizing symptoms and alerting folks so that they can intervene for people.
so what does alerting somebody look like? I mean, you know, did Georgia mention like what a proper program looks like for people to report things?
Absolutely. So most of our time, our employee assistance programs have been tied to drugs and alcohol, right? Drugs and alcohol. And
Right.
she encourages companies to add mental health to the EAP, where it can be anonymous, it can be protected, you know, and then that person can then help that other individual maybe that's in need get the right need that they need. My takeaway was we're not trying to turn safety professionals and supervisors into psychiatrists, therapists. You know, I'm not qualified to deal with someone in a mental health crisis. You know,
But
I think
you
that's
can
why
get
we
them
have
to
such
where
a
they
hard
need to
time
go,
talking about it, right?
right?
What do I say? What do I do? You know, what works with this one person may not work with this other person, you know? How does this work? But making this part of the EAP and planning ahead and having resources there available. Remember, this is what the CEOs of small businesses said was one of their top
I will say
safety
this.
concerns.
I will say this. Almost every single company that I have been with that has an EAP, right? A corporate company, whether it's small, medium sized, large, right? They do have mental health services involved in that EAP, but they are not highlighted the same as the addiction counseling,
Right.
right? But I will also say that there's a lot of stigma. I think there's more stigma attached to mental health issues than there is to alcohol abuse or some of those other things for workers, right? Because I think there's some, you know, I don't know. I work in construction. You work in oil and gas, right? The guys drink. It's just a lot of them do, right? Some have stopped, some have gone sober, but by and large, there's this culture of you know the manly man drinks, but the manly man, or even you know all genders, right? It's not easy to say I need help. Emotionally, I'm struggling.
You know, I think we're getting better at it. You know, my generation of the military and older, you just choke that stuff down and get on with
Right.
your life.
And you keep moving.
Right? You don't talk about it. You definitely don't talk about it at work.
Right.
Okay. But that situation is changing. There are more people that are demanding. Now, everybody wants to criticize this younger generation, but let me say something in their defense. They're demanding workplaces that take care of their mental well-being, not just their physical well-being. They're demanding it. And if they don't get it, they're going to go someplace else. Right.
Right.
So it's becoming more accepted to talk about. It's becoming more accepted in the military community. Is it perfect? No. Is there a stigma out there still? Yes.
Do we need to work on it? Yes.
Absolutely. But we
And
have
that's
to
okay.
begin somewhere. And we have to begin somewhere. And I think it's amazing that this is being led by the CEOs. And in this report said this was a leading cause of injury. Leading cause of injury, not concern. Right. Hey, you know, I'm concerned.
People being out of work. People being out of work.
Somebody did not come to work today, or it affected their work in such a manner they couldn't be productive. They were injured, right? So there's a lot of resources that are out there to go and get the signs and symptoms to educate your workers. My advice to employers is develop a program, develop training, educate your supervisors, make
Stay on top of it.
is in place, right? try to remove the stigma for people reaching out. You know, there was a long time stigma about drugs and alcohol. If somebody had an alcohol problem, they didn't want to talk about that at work either.
No,
Right?
no.
Drug problem, companies with zero tolerance policies, you know, I understand. But with this mental health thing, companies need to address this because the workforce is demanding it. And we don't
Right.
have to turn everybody into psychologists. We just need to have people in a process to refer. Like as a safety professional, I might say, you know, Dr. Martin seems a little off to HR.
Right.
To HR.
Just can somebody check on them?
Can somebody check on them? And that's really the thing from George's presentation that I took away is, hey, be your brother's keeper in some respects, but you don't have to be your brother's fixer.
Right. Right. I love that. That's a really good message. And it's a good one to kind of hammer home and actually stop on. I will say this, right? I like to keep up on the news. This popped up in my feed. I thought it was interesting. I thought these two things were interesting, especially when it comes to small businesses. I mean, I'm a researcher, right? So I'd love to see what the bigger companies say, right? If they mirror OSHA or some of those other things. But this is a fun little article. Do you have the title of it, James, in front of you?
Let's see. I'll pull it up here on my phone real quick. It's really cool article. And it's a recent article. It just came out, I think, over the last couple of days. It is from riskandinsurance.com. The title is Survey Reveals Small Businesses Safety Concerns and Unusual Claims. Now, if you want to have a laugh, and maybe that's an episode we ought to do, if we can ever have a call in with strangest claims. You know,
I know where we probably can do that. That'd be kind of cool. But it is an interesting study. It's not a long read, and there are some little funny little ticklers in there about things that people have claimed for their workers' comp and their injuries. So
I'm gonna give you one. And we
okay,
won't go through
just
them all.
one as a teaser because we got to wrap
small
this.
bird. Here we go. One small business had to file a claim, workers' comp claim, after a bird flew into a worker's face, breaking their nose while they were on the roof of a house.
Work related?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We could talk about record keeping.
Prevention through design. In this case,
face shields.
Duck, shotgun. Roll Tide.
Sure. Roll Tide. So with that, James, let me just lead people again to the article. Survey reveals small business safety concerns and unusual claims. We're going to wrap it for now and tell these folks what they should be doing if they don't already.
Every Tuesday, a new episode of the Risk Matrix drops on YouTube and Spotify. On YouTube, look for us on the Veriforce channel. Hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, hit that subscribe button over on Spotify. And you not only will be alerted to when a new episode comes out, but have access to almost 50 episodes. We're almost
crazy.
50
episodes.
50
episodes. We got to do something big for the 50th.
That's it. Sounds good. But thank y'all for following us. Thank you for listening to us. We do this for you. And most of all, y'all keep doing what you do to bring workers home safe from high hazard jobs. Till next time.
Roll Tide.
Out.